You're listening to We Deepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder and CEO of We Deepen, Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional coach and matchmaking. We Deepen was recently featured in LA Magazine and also on Good Day LA. They took the article that was in LA Mag and featured it on the news just recently. And a friend sent me the clip as she was in the gym and was like, "Oh my gosh, look, you're on the news." And when I say We Deepen was featured in there, it was one of our, I guess we call it an experience, shop and shag. A couple of years ago, I had this idea to send singles to the grocery store in Los Angeles, Air One, on Mondays between 9 and 11 p.m. And that's when singles shop. The code word is soup. And LA Mag heard about it. They actually brought it back because it was something that we did pre-COVID. And I hadn't listed it on the calendar just yet. And LA Mag was like, "Bring that back. We want to write about it." So it's now popping, and the matchmaking database, if you go to wedeepen.com, you can see in that little nav bar, actually, it's now on the front page. Click that matchmaking button and you can enter the matchmaking database. There's, one thing that I will say about the people that we attract in the We Deepen ecosystem is that they're all growth-minded or open-minded. As you'll see when you enter that database, we're really interested in people who are committed to growth and having their relationships are committed to growth as well. So check that out. Also, if you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate it. It helps more people find it and helps me continue to produce it. Today's episode features Dr. Avrum Weiss. He is episode 37 of this podcast, Why Men Are Afraid of Women. I had the honor of taking a workshop with Dr. Avrum last week. It was for a bunch of therapists. And although I'm not a therapist, I got into this workshop, and it was fascinating. It expanded on, men's fears of women, how it's driving their intimate relationship. And in today's episode, there's a lot of things that I want to cover. However, one thing that I really want to hone in on is how women can best love men. Knowing that these fears exist, what do we do about them? And creating awareness around them, because I think both men, as they become aware of their fears, and then women become aware of these fears, we can all work together. And I imagine that women have fears too.
Of course.
Yeah.
I can't speak authoritatively about women because I'm not one. I feel more comfortable speaking about men, of which I am one, but no doubt about it.
It's so great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be here and talk to you. I love where you want to go. And I'd like to just jump in right there because I've been asking women a really interesting question lately.
Okay.
And that question, the question is kind of interesting. The answer has been disturbing. So I've been asking women, what did your mother teach you about men? Not so much through her words, but through her actions, particularly the way she behaved and treated and talked about your father, if there was a father, but in whatever way, how did she behave and talk about and show you? How did she teach you? What did she teach you about men?
You asked this question in the workshop too.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I love a good question. For me, when I was thinking about my answer to that question, my mother taught me that you stick by a man, you don't leave him, and they have the authority, and that they can kind of pretty much do whatever they want.
Right.
And you don't leave them.
Right. So it's, as your answer is a little different than most, but shares a lot of So it's not a very flattering picture of men. It's not like you stay with him because this is the best thing ever happened in your life. And it's like you stay with him in the way that you don't leave a crappy job because you have kids to take care of. It's more about, dedication and devotion than it is about satisfaction or intimacy or.
And I think with my mom, it was more about you got married in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Right.
And so you don't divorce, you make a commitment. They were each other's first. So you stay together.
Yeah. And of course, love wasn't in anywhere in what you said. There was no mention of love. And so the reason I think that's important, going to your question of how can women help, not just men with their fears, but how can women help their relationships if they're heterosexual? Because if you ask men, or if you listen to men talk about women, the word you will hear most often is criticize. Men will often, like in a couple sessions, men will say things like, right there, see, she was being critical of me. And it's not immediately apparent to me. It's not obvious what they heard that seemed critical to them. But if you kind of, strain and look at, you can kind of track the thread. But what seems sort of inconsequential to me and something in passing to them seemed like enormous criticism. But then when you hear women sort of own up to how critical they were taught to be of men, then you realize that men are not being paranoid. They just don't know why they feel that way, but they are accurately sensing what is coming at them in a relationship. And so I think we've criticized men for this a lot, and said that they're withholding and they're resistant and they're in the power struggle. But I think we haven't looked at the truth of it, which is that they are accurately perceiving what's coming at them, which is not complimentary and often ranges between critical and disdain.
Are you familiar with Alison Armstrong's work?
No.
She's her website is understandingmen.com. And she references how some women are toad farmers. They turn men into toads. They turn princes into toads because through they're criticizing them. And because women have this, these higher standards of themselves and of what a perfect human is. And so they have these expectations that this man is this perfect human being.
Right. And they were taught by their mothers to not expect much from men and not rely on men and not turn to your male partner as the person you would go to for intimacy. That's not something you expect from a man. And so then, as we know, there's the old, forgotten what, the Hawthorne effect study, which is they told teachers, these are A students, these are B students, and these are C students. And the kids who the teacher thought were A students tended to get A's, whether they were the smartest kids or not. And the kids who the teachers thought were C students tended to get C's, even though they had formally gotten A. So that the teacher's expectations shaped what the students became. And we do that in intimate relationships. And so if in a heterosexual relationship, if the woman, mostly unconsciously, if her expectations of a man are, he's not going to really show up, you can't count on him, you better supervise him, but all that stuff, then men find themselves behaving in that way, and nobody really understands why that's going on.
So I shared this with you a bit before we started recording this podcast. In 2018, I started creating around this theory that I had.
Yes.
That man's life purpose is to make women happy. And I got
you brought that up.
I got a lot of pushback from,
I'm sure you did.
from people.
I bet from men and women.
Both from men and women. Yes.
Right.
There was actually, one of my uncles is gay and he did not like that theory. And I was like, well, Uncle David, I see the way that you treat grandma, his mom, and you would do anything for her. So this is not just like one man, one woman. It's like all women. I see men light up constantly when women are happy. I was actually even in a client session with a guy recently, and I said to him, imagine if all the women in the world were happy. And his eyes lit up as he just was like, imagining and looking around, and the smile on his face. And then he couldn't even verbalize what that experience would be like, but I could also see him light up in the imagining of that.
So what I want to ask you about that is, when you say, and I agree with you, are you thinking of that as something innately true of men, or something that men have been socialized to believe?
I think it's innate. Like even a man's body is designed to make a woman happy.
Interesting. It's interesting. I think of it as more socialized, and unfortunately, I think what drives it is fear of inadequacy. So I think what men are taught is that you really don't have much worth as a person. Your worth as a person is limited to the functions that you serve for other people. It's like you're a good tool. And so then men are taught that their job is to keep women and children happy and satisfied, which unfortunately ends up that anytime a woman is unhappy about anything, even if it has nothing to do with the guy is likely to take that as an indicator of his failure as a protector and a provider. So that the woman is looking at him like, so she'll come home and say, had a really hard day at work, and then he gets defensive and withdraws. She's like, I wasn't even talking about you, because she doesn't understand that he's taking that on as a personal failure. I should have somehow, I wasn't there, but somehow I should have protected you, or I need to go to the school and, talk to that person, but it becomes my responsibility, so that if you're unhappy, I'm a failure. I'm less of a man.
Yes. I think within this, there can be a dark side and a light side to the theory. Yeah. And it's, to me, I look at it as more of like an overarching spiritual spiritual theory. I don't believe it's man's responsibility to make a woman happy.
Yeah.
But in the circusry of life, and women, their intention is to wholeheartedly love men. So it's this whole 360 that's happening. Again, not responsible. I had, when I was parading around that theory, there's a Brian Reeves, who is a well-known relationship coach. He actually became very popular years ago. He wrote this article, Choose Her Every Day or Leave Her, that was read by millions and millions of people. And I recorded his response to this theory. And the thing is, like most of the time, women don't fully even know what they want. Like what would even make them happy. But underneath of that, what really makes us happy is when love is served into the world. Yeah. And through these actions of, and it's not, it doesn't need to be the superficial layer of you putting all the pressure on men to do it all. It's like, we're a team. There's like a human team, the man and woman, human team, and whatever genders. I know we're talking specifically about man and woman, and I don't believe, again, this is just a sexual or romantic thing that's happening. It's procreation. It's how all life is formed. Yes.
Well, I think the clearest example of what you're talking about is acted out sexually between men and women, because what you find is that. So in a men's group, I think last week, guys started talking about sex, and the number one issue that immediately bubbled to the surface was their anxiety about performance. So they're not talking about pleasure. They're not talking about intimacy. They're not talking about love. They're not even talking about pleasure. They're talking about anxiety. And so men become hyper-focused on their partner's pleasure, which is interesting because we think of men as very stereotypically, very self-centered lovers, like I got mine and whatever. but it's actually the opposite. And in fact, in surveys of men, overwhelmingly they report that pleasing their partner is the most important thing. And that might sound good, but you really don't want a lover who's just interested in pleasing you. It might seem like a good idea.
True.
But it doesn't go well. It goes better when both people are interested in their own and men really suck at paying attention to their own pleasure. In fact, if I ever find the time, the next book I'd like to do is a book about men's impaired capacity for pleasure and play. Men typically don't know a thing about either one. They can compete, they can play sports, but they can't play.
What do you suggest men do?
I'm not there. I haven't figured that out yet, but
I have some answers.
Okay, great. Let me hear them.
Yeah. Well, what we Deepen it was, as I began doing, a single dating experience. And then as I would follow work of, professionals like yourself, and I would hear that, humans are more inclined to connect when they're in states of play and joy and fun. And I looked around and I saw this trend of, in New York City and Los Angeles, of ecstatic dances and improv workshops or, TED Talk style speaker salons that also have a connective type experience in them, laughter workshops.
Interesting.
We would run a program called We Play Recess, and it was driven by improv. There's also a program that we carry called Clown Church. Jet Everlay does this. It's emotional intelligence meets improv. Yeah. And improv is I think one of the greatest easy ways for people to go and feel a sense of play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great ideas. And so what you're talking about, I think, plays out very clearly in most couples' sexual relationship, in that it's almost more. It's not that men don't want to have sex, but that it's they have a lot of anxiety and insecurity about it. So much so that it greatly interferes with their ability to experience pleasure.
It's interesting from a personal thing of like when I'm with men, sometimes I get triggered when, we're in the I guess the sexual play, and they're like, I want to hear you, or I want to hear you come, or I want to see you come. And I'm like, just let me be in my experience. Don't give me that pressure
you're spot on. See. That's right. And that's why men are fixated on whether or not a woman climaxed, because it's not, it ain't generosity, unfortunately. It's insecurity. If you come, then I did a good job.
Yeah.
That's like a sticker on the chart. I get, I'm a good boy.
And there's so much more to it. Sex feels good if I without coming. Like there's the experience too. It's not, that's like the destination. What we're seeing more men is the trending of, semen retention. Right. Is that, so that's even kind of confusing. I remember I was with a man in the past, and he was practicing semen retention, but he didn't tell me that he was practicing that. So I was even confused of like, what's going on? Like, can we both participate? And I guess it all then comes down to communication.
Sure. And the one thing that men are unlikely to communicate is about how scared they are, because there's so many prohibitions against being vulnerable with a woman.
And then where do men go to learn sex? Where do women go to learn sex? Because they sure aren't teaching us that in school.
No, it was the Times did a really wonderful article about this some years ago. They asked a group of preteen latency age boys where they went to learn about sex and what they learned. And it's so sad because, of course, you already know the answer. The answer is they learn about it from pornography. And so then they have this incredible conundrum, because they're saying, well, I watch porn and the women are really getting off on guys who are, first of all, have enormous penises, which makes mine look like, I'm afraid for anybody to see it. And they're rough and they're not gentle and they're not asking the woman what she wants. They're just taking the lead. And then they have an experience with a real woman that's very different than and they don't know what the hell to make of it. They don't, it seems like that's what you're supposed to do, but then she doesn't like it when I do that. And I'm so glad that I'm not a young man today.
There are experiences that we list on We Deepen. Currently, most of them are happening in Los Angeles. Some are here in Austin, Texas. A lot of times when I'm working with private clients, I become more aware because some of them we can list publicly, some of them we can't list. They're the more private affairs happening. But, they range of a spectrum of BDSM workshops to intimate Tantra. The Tantra Institute puts on a lot of experiences that helps teach about play. And we've also seen some of them go wrong. The One Taste. Are you familiar with One Taste? Mm-hmm. One Taste is an offering. They were a brand that came out of San Francisco, and there was a woman behind it. She did a couple of TED Talks. She had this theory that if women were orgasming every day, the world would be a better place. I was like, okay, I can buy into that. And so she had, I don't know if she developed it, but she started teaching a stroking practice. Uh-huh. And they had a specific way that, you would come into this container. It's called oming, orgasmic meditation. And it would be a 15-minute practice that a woman would do with a partner. And it was very structured in how they do it. And I think even sometimes I watch the videos and he puts on his rubber gloves and, they use the coconut oil and there's no, I can't say there's like an intimate bond necessarily happening with the people. It's really about getting off. And she was organizing these courses to teach people how to do this practice, and then networking events where you would come and you would find your oming partner. And they got a commercial space in Los Angeles, in Venice, in 2018. It was when We Deepen was new, and we were just beginning to represent some of these brands that were designed, or I saw that, once woven together could help people have more meaningful, loving relationships. And they invited me to, their course and to their programs. And I went and I was like, I can see how people, it's not for me, but I can see how other people like this. And I remember I had it on my, to-do list to speak to advisors, like, should we bring One Taste on? It would be one of the first brands. I'm not quite sure this. I'm not sure about this. And then probably 2 weeks later, there was an article in Bloomberg that came out that took the darkness. It was like the dark side of One Taste. Yep. And everything went downhill after that. I was like, cross it off my to-do list. Yep. No more. And now there's a documentary out called Orgasmic Inc. on Netflix that speaks about this.
I think most men listening to the story you just told would be terrified. I think they would be thinking, oh my God, one a day. It's my responsibility to give her an orgasm once. I think they would be looking for, someplace to hide. As opposed to, I think the stereotype would be like, oh, we're going to have sex every day. Oh, great. I don't think that's what's really going through most men's minds.
Yeah. Well, when I was parading around this theory, at the same time, I was, this was Feminine Weapon Day 2018. And the concept came to me in 2017 around probably 2 weeks was downloaded to me to year 5 Feminine Weapon Day each year. The men have supported us so much. They bought 50% of the tickets. I would barter all the venues from them, like, let's get them involved in this. And we did this, the For the Love of Men campaign. And so we were to photograph men who supported us, uplifted us, made us happy. And I would ask women to nominate these guys. And of course, 2 weeks later, what unfolded in the public forum was Me Too and Time's Up. And there I was out with parading like, and let's love men. And I got bullied, and I posted about it in, there was a Facebook group called Girls Night Out. I've since been kicked out of this group at this time. And I had invited women in that group to elect men who support them, uplift them, make them happy. And that post got over 2,000 responses. And many of the women were on fire about it. And then others started arguing with the others, and it just blew up into a big chaos. But around that time, I would ask women, what did they love about men? And I would even do that in my private practice when I would be working with a woman, when they would come in with this list of, here's all the things that they wanted in a partner. And I'd say, hey, you know what, can we put that list aside and just tell me all the things that you love about men in general? And
Great question.
Oftentimes got blank stares. Like, I don't know.
See, that's back to mama. That's back to what your mama taught you. See, there are things women love about men, and that's sad to me that they didn't know what they are.
What are some of the things that that you see of women loving about men?
Well, this is politically incorrect. Trigger warning, I guess, because I think it starts with basic biology. For men and women to be sexually intimate, men have to be firm, and women have to be warm and receptive. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that affects our entire relationships. And I'm not saying men shouldn't be warm and receptive or that women shouldn't be firm, but I do think our biology has an impact on our relationships. So I think what women love about men is protectiveness, loyalty, reliability, strength. And I don't mean like macho kind of, I mean like I'm distraught. There he is. He's my guy. My mother just died. I know he's going to be there for me, like nobody else would be there. Friends will come and go, and after the first few days, they'll forget, but he won't.
Mm.
You react. See?
Yeah. How do women best love men?
What's the best way for women to love men?
Yeah.
I think, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about. So you have to get past the cultural programming that denigrates men. You have to be willing to sit with a man and be in relationship with a man, bracketing all the stuff you've been taught and seeing him for the person. And like we were talking before about the way you see someone evokes some of who they are. If you see him as an unreliable dullard and a jerk, he'll be that. If you see his best self that he hasn't even actualized yet, he will actualize that. He will become his best self. I mean, back to what you were talking about in terms of, dating and what people, actually, that was before we recorded, but I said to you, people look for exactly the wrong thing. People look for the opposite of what they, so all the time people come to me in new relationships and they say, oh, he said he was going to be there at 7. He didn't come till 7:30. That's it. He's dead to me. I'm done with him. I'm like, where are you going to find somebody who's never late? Like, that doesn't happen. And where are you going to find somebody you don't have conflict with? That would just be a dead person. And so it's not whether or not he showed up on time. It's what happens after he disappoints you. You're going to be disappointed. That doesn't mean anything. That's not an indication that it's not a good relationship. It's what happens between the two of you when you tell him you're disappointed. That's what you should be watching.
Mm. Yeah, before we started recording, we were speaking of compatibility. How do you assess compatibility?
Yeah.
I had shared that, within the We Deepen matchmaking databases people are entering, there's this question of how do we best support you? And the 3 top answers, number 1, which is, obvious, is they're entering the matchmaking database. They want people who are
Sure.
right for them to date, that they're interested in dating. Number 2 is that they want support in how do they assess compatibility, and then attract that right person to them. And number 3 is how do I set up the relationship?
Right.
So let's talk about how do they assess this? Go ahead. How do they assess compatibility?
Well, I think there's a piece we have to add here because attraction is almost entirely unconscious. And so you can make up all the rules you want for what you should do or shouldn't do. You're still going to be attracted to who you are. So you can say, and people do all the time, they tell me the list of things that they want. But then if you look at most couples, they are not that. Most happy couples are. So I will confess that on my first date with my wife, like a jerk, I ended the date by saying, I'm not sure we should see each other again because we're so incompatible. And we're married, happily married. So I couldn't have been more wrong because I had ideas in my head about what I thought, but my heart was leading me, and it always does. And so you're stuck with who you're attracted to. You might want to be attracted to this person, but you got to work with what you got. You're stuck with who you're attracted to. Then you can be interested about what does who I'm attracted to, what is that telling me about me? So if I'm attracted to a guy who's inconsiderate and not supportive and inattentive and rude and disrespectful, I picked him. What the hell's going on with me that I picked him? And I can choose not to pursue the relationship, but I can't make myself not be attracted to him. So every date should be a learning experience about yourself. Every date should be like trying a new restaurant. You never had Nepalese food and a new Nepalese restaurant opens, and you go and you find out if you like Nepalese food or not. You didn't know that before you went. You go on a date with, every person is unique. Every combination of two people is unique. You go on a date and if you're paying attention, you'll learn a lot about what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
So that first date, at the end, your brain tells you, I don't think this is right. Can you speak more? Like, what was happening?
I think that's an estrangement from yourself. I think when you try to override your unconscious attraction, you're not trusting yourself. You're not thinking that I like the expression. You're worried that your picker's broken. You're worried that the people you're attracted to are not good for you, and that might be true. But you're going to keep picking them until you do whatever internal work you need to do to pick someone else. You can't mechanically make yourself like somebody.
I want to also acknowledge in that moment, because you said something and it's apparent that your significant other didn't lock in to that statement as real.
She was smarter than I was.
Yeah. So how did she kind of decide that she was going to, and maybe this is a question for her, but to leave that, I don't believe what he says, or
She
not to hold on,
knew.
because that could be something that somebody goes back to, like, remember that time when you said that?
She already knew. We had this conversation recently. She told me that she knew from reading my profile that this was a guy she was interested in. So my sort of silly statement didn't deter her from what she knew. And my saying that didn't deter her.
So like you mentioned something, you're attracted to you. Is that what you said? You're attracted to similarities?
You're attracted to who you're attracted to. And it's almost never similarities. It's a little geeky here, but Freud and Jung had many disagreements. And one of the most profound was Freud talked about repetition compulsion, meaning that you are compelled to repeat the same patterns again and again and again in a negative, pejorative way. And Jung said, it's close, but no cigar, pun intended. And Jung said, what we do is we seek out people who can help us further grow in the areas we are less developed. And so you get into a relationship and you consciously say, well, I don't want to marry my mother. And then 3 years in, you realize you have picked not your mother, but somebody who evokes in you the unfinished stuff you have with your mother. So it's a chance to work through that stuff, but it's irritating as hell because she reminds you of your mother who irritated you. So that's the moment where either you're mature enough to say, okay, this is irritating, but I really have an opportunity here to have a different ending, to get someplace I haven't been able to. And, you can read all the self-help books you want. And frankly, you can go to all the therapy you want, but eventually it's going to change when you live it differently. I think therapy helps you hang in there and tolerate all the discomfort, but eventually you have to live it differently. And that happens exclusively in intimate relationships, not necessarily romantic, but that kind of core change, I think, only happens. You don't go to the mountaintop and contemplate your navel. You gotta roll up your sleeves and get messy with another human being.
So how does somebody assess compatibility?
It's a great question, and I have an incredibly simple answer, which again is not politically correct. That's why I love talking to you.
Great. Yeah. You don't have to be politically correct here.
Okay, so I'm going to state it in its boldest form that will maybe be a little startling. But I love you means I love the me I am with you. I read a great novel recently, and there was a beautiful description that if you were in a rowboat offshore and you could measure the energy, so the waves come to shore and then the energy comes back out when the waves break on the shore. He said, if you had an instrument that could measure the energy in the waves, you could tell whether the waves had broken on a square lighthouse, that would send back one energy, or a round lighthouse, which would send back a different energy. Being in a relationship is like being in a rowboat. I can't see the lighthouse. I cannot really see my partner for who she is, but I can feel what being with her brings out in me. And the person you want to stay with the rest of your life is the person who brings out the best in you, the person who brings out things in you that you didn't even know were there. So when you feel like you're living your best life and are your best self, then you want to lock that person into a long-term contract. You want to sign them up.
Why is this answer not politically correct?
Because I think you're supposed to say that love is selfless and all that stuff. And I'm saying that loving someone has to do with how I feel, not who you are. And that's why people get it 180 degrees wrong, because they keep coming back and talking to me about, well, he did this or she did that. I'm like, I don't care. That's not important. You should have seen the shirt he wore on our third date. Like,
I can very much resonate with what you're sharing because, I'm in my early 40s. I've been doing this relational work for a decade. I didn't get into the relational work as an expert in relationships because I went to school. It's like over this past decade, it's been, you're working in relationships now. Universe, it's like, let's give you the course in relationships through experiences and knowledge and conversations. And I have noticed myself, I'm totally different from a decade ago with who I am in connection with another person than who I am now. And really where that came from is getting more comfortable with myself and being able to be in those connections where I am speaking my truth. I'm seeing somebody right now, and in that experience with him, I love how honest and vocal and expressive that I am about sharing what's really happening inside of me.
There you go. That's what we all love. Yes.
And I will caveat, because this is now, of this particular person, we're seeing each other. He's not my long-term person because we are at different stages in our life of what we ultimately desire. But as we're in this shared experience, there is some growing that's happened that we're both aware of. So it's a great Practice
That's the
partner.
brass ring. That's what you just said is the brass ring. That's what's in it. Look, relationships are a huge pain in the ass. And anybody who tells you they're not is not in a relationship and has never been in one. Anybody who's been in a long-term relationship will say, oh my God. So why would we put up? Because of the brass ring, because I will only be my best self through intimate relationships with other people. And that, by the way, is what therapy is. Although we're gun shy about calling therapy intimate, it sure as hell is. And if it isn't, you're not going to get much out of it.
I want to, because you brought up therapy and you're the workshop that you recently did, one of the topics of conversation was how to engage men in therapy, how to get them into therapy, how to engage them in therapy. And my flatmate is a man, and he had shared, therapy, it's just so expensive. And you had shared, well, actually, men in therapy make more money.
They do. Inevitably, almost invariably. Because I think you'll totally understand this. I mean, I'm imagining that you believe that your success in your business has everything to do with being aligned internally. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what therapy helps people with. If you get more lined up with yourself, you are probably going to be more successful in whatever way you define success.
And you also say men in therapy have better sex.
No question about it, because they can become less frightened and more comfortable with being a full participant in the sex and saying things like, I really like it when you fill in the blank, and being more open about their own pleasure. It's just, it weighs heavy on my heart how, I don't even know the words, how play deprived, pleasure deprived, compulsively driven, how many men just put their nose down, and me, absolutely me, was one of them, and just run and then get to the finish line and go, damn, I didn't have much fun. I accomplished a lot, but here I am at the end and with a lot of regrets.
One of my favorite things to do when I'm working privately with somebody, it's always part of my edge as I'm doing it, but they'll share with me situations that they're experiencing relationally with a partner or somebody they're interested in, and they'll tell me all about it. And then I'll essentially role play the communication to that person. Yeah. And I say it's always an edge for me because I'm pretty much performing improv in that moment and reflecting back to them everything that they've just said, but saying it to the other person. Yeah. And at the end of it, they always look at me like, oh my God. Yeah. Right. Exactly. But all I've done is pretty much said what you said me, and say it in a way so they can they see it, reflect it back, and then they hear it. Yes. Yes. What they can't hear their own thoughts, so they hear their own thoughts, and when they hear them, they're like, "Yes, that doesn't sound so hard to say to somebody else." Right. But we get stuck in the this is like the brain, the intellectualizing love work. We get stuck in the head of like, "Oh my God, how do I say it? It's not going to be perfect saying, and how they're going to receive it?" And you get stuck in the fear. You get stuck that I won't be loved, that I will be rejected, and that it will feel like a rejection of my whole person. The thing we were just talking about in terms of how do you determine compatibility, the other sort of concrete piece of that always gets me is when people say to me, "Oh, I don't know if she's into me or not." I'm like, of course you do. You mean to tell me you don't know the difference between sitting and talking to somebody who likes you and sitting and talking to somebody who doesn't like you? Of course you know the difference. Of course, because again, the waves coming back to you are very different. And so then people get lost in their head and make decisions about like when to call or what to do based on their anxiety, as opposed to based on what they know. It's so true that there's so much out there of misconnections because people are like, oh, yeah, I was talking to a woman yesterday and I asked her, similar, do men know that you're interested in them?
Right.
And I didn't think so. Like, no, I don't tell them.
Mostly women are taught that that's one of the chips that they have, and they shouldn't play it. They shouldn't let men know because it'll take away an advantage they have, which is like, are we playing football or are we dating? It's like,
we're on the same team.
Right. Exactly. And if we're not, then bye. If we're not going to be on the same team, I don't need to see you again.
I've heard a lot of men too share that they, when a relationship ends, that oftentimes they'll stick around for longer because they're scared of hurting the other human being. However, I think they're scared of hurting themselves for hurting somebody else because they get hurt because they believe they're hurting someone else.
I'll feel like a bad person. Feel like that if I'm not interested, then I don't really have the right to not be interested. That I have to still act like I am interested because I'll be a bad person if I'm not interested, which is crazy.
If a man is in relationship with a woman and decides that he no longer wants to engage in that connection, and I'm talking relationships, let's say pre-marriage. Yeah. What does a man do?
Well, I don't think we could say pre-marriage and post-marriage because I think it's the same thing. The thing that we fail to understand in those situations is that there's a feminist principle called mutuality. And if it's not working for you, it is not working for her. Now, you may be more ready to be honest about it, but if it ain't working, it ain't working. There's no such thing as a relationship that works for me and not for you, or works for you and not for me. And so I'm just if I'm that person, I'm just a little further along in being courageous enough to let myself know that it's not working. So when I come to you and say, it's not working, I'm not saying it's not working for me. I'm saying from my vantage point, this isn't working.
That's what I've heard. If it's not a fuck yes for you, it can't be a fuck yes for me.
Yeah. It's the same thing about, I don't know if she's into me. Of course you know. And people for various reasons are more or less ready to let themselves know their own truth. And so one person may insist, but they're not really telling their own truth. They're telling the story that they believe they need to say in order to not be terrified. But it's not the truth.
You mentioned that you have a lot to say about how to establish a relationship as well. So now two people have discovered they're both attracted to each other. They both like each other. What next?
Well, the most important thing is to, as soon as possible, stop pretending to be the person that you think that the other person is interested in. So I always encourage people on a first date to pick something that you find fun, even if it's goofy, like miniature golf, like growing up, like that's not cool. But if you really like miniature golf and you invite somebody to play miniature golf with you, you're really sharing, what you enjoy is an intimate thing to share with somebody. So if you, really like Nepalese food, you should invite the person you're going out with to do something, because you will be more openly yourself doing something that that's you. Now remind me what your question was. I think I got off track.
Establishing the relationship. Yes. Actually, yes. Before I jump into that, I do know of a situation where finances comes up in dating as well. And I believe this is also where men can feel inadequate sometimes. Specifically, men have shared with me of dating women in Los Angeles who are these models and actresses, and they're getting flown on private planes. And then a man who may not be billionaire status comes along and he attracts the beautiful woman. And one man was sharing that, he was going on vacation and booking the hotel room, and he was, he's financially free, but he's not a billionaire. And so he was confused of what type of hotel to book. Does he go outside of his means because that's the lifestyle that this person is used to living? Or does he, book the hotel that he would typically normally book?
I think you know the answer. The answer is you book the hotel you would book, because if you go outside of your means, then you're pretending to be somebody you're not. And so then the worst thing is, it's like going on a job interview and pretending you know something you don't. The worst thing that can happen is you get the job and then they expect you to know that because you sold yourself as knowing it. Whereas I say, if you go on a job interview and they say, do you know this? I would say you should say no, because you shouldn't want a job in which you're going to be expected to do something you don't know how to do. And I would say the same in the relationship. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life with someone feeling bad that you're not good enough? Is that attractive to you? I mean, she's a model, she's beautiful, that's great. But you're sitting there, looking at TripAdvisor and trying to decide which hotel, and you're feeling crappy about yourself. That's not a feeling I'm attracted to.
Yeah,
so
and
again, that's the resonance in my relationship with you. I end up feeling crappy about myself. Why would I sign up for more of that?
Yeah. It's either, then someone needs to decipher, does that mean that this is not the right relationship for me? Or does this mean that I have some more work to do to make this relationship be the right relationship for me?
I would say neither one. I would say the two of them have a conversation to have. And it might go something like, he says, I went to book the hotel and I got pretty anxious and unsure of myself. And this is where I would normally stay, but I'm worried that you won't be happy there. Because we don't know where just because she's a supermodel and flies, private jets, she might say, I really like that place. That'd be great. I never get to stay in little B&Bs. I'd really like that. Or she may say, well, no, I want to stay at the most expensive hotel on the beach, in which case, have a nice life.
Yeah. Okay. So my initial question was around establishing the relationship.
One of the things I like to ask people who are dating is, what do you think that people in long-term committed relationships, what do you think they spend most of their time doing? It's none of the things that people worry about in dating. So people in dating worry about sexual attraction, and what else do they worry about? Money. But people in long-term committed relationships have breakfast together, they talk about their day, they sleep together, which is not euphemistically sex, I'm saying they sleep together, they hang out, they go for walks, they do very ordinary, everyday things. And so we kind of overlook that the single factor that probably determines the success of a relationship more than anything else is someone you like to hang out with. Someone you enjoy spending time with. Because if you marry or commit or whatever, that is for you, you're going to be spending a lot of time, especially with COVID. You're spending a lot more time than you thought you were going to be spending. So yeah, it's somebody that you like to hang out with. And so you can go on all these fancy dates. I worked with a guy once who was obsessively driven to have the first date be the most spectacular experience that a woman had ever had, and didn't understand why there were never any second dates, since he put so much thought. And I said, well, it's all bullshit. It's all make-believe. You're doing these extraordinary things for someone you've never met. It can't be real. You're just trying to impress her. Why don't you take her to Five Guys for a burger, and talk to her? You might have more second dates. But literally none of the women wanted to go on a second date with him doing everything he could to impress them.
So I hear that of doing the everyday mundane things with each other and hanging out. What conversation should people be having?
That's a great question. I don't think there's one answer to that. I guess what I think is that people should talk about what they're interested in talking about, not try to figure out what the other person is interested in talking about. But again, about being yourself, that you should, if something's troubling you at work, that's a good thing to talk about. If you're going to Mexico with your friends and you're excited about that, those are all personal sharing. Anything that you have feelings about, either positive or negative, anything that has energy for you, that's what you should talk about. Because every conversation is a test drive. Every time you're dating and you talk to somebody, if you talk to them about things that aren't important to you, you don't learn anything. But if you talk to them about things that are really important to you, each time you do that, you learn something about how it goes in this unique combination of personalities, how it goes when I talk to you about something that I'm unsure about myself in, or passionate about, or anything that has a lot of you in it.
Okay, let's say a couple they're dating, they're getting to know each other. Maybe they have a desire for marriage.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that they should definitely talk about before they decide that they are going to stay together till death do us part?
That's a really important thing. And it's shocking how few of the things people should talk about they actually do. And the stuff they think is important that they make sure and talk about is, in my mind, not important. So the things people are scared to talk about and avoid are things like money, which people rarely talk about and is incredibly important to talk about, and children and child rearing. You know, children is the one you can compromise on and find middle of the road solutions on almost everything but children. You can't, there's no, you do or you don't have children. You don't have a half a child or a child half time. You know, you are or are not going to have children. So that's one you really do need to know where each other are.
And even specifically of diving deeper into that, not only do we want to have children, but how far will we go to have the children? Because somebody, could say, yes, we're going to get married and have children. They have a fertility challenge. Right. And then one is like, okay, let's adopt. And the other's like, I don't want to adopt. And they're like, well, you said you want to have children. Yeah, I want to have children, but I'm not willing to adopt.
Yeah. And then I would add to that, I know a young couple who didn't have money at all when they got married, but they wrote a prenup anyway, because it wasn't about money. It was about things like, if we have a child and one of us stays home to take care of the child, how will that person be compensated for per year for time that they took out of if we divorce, what is the compensation? And usually that stuff just gets worked out in divorce attorney's office for a lot of money. And wouldn't it be amazing if you sat down and said, okay, I'm going to stay home for 3 years with the kids, but if we don't make it, then I get this back for having given up 3 years of my. So it comes back to money. So kids, and how you're going to handle that financially, and are you going to share finances or not? Are you going to have separate finances? How interdependent do you want to be about your finances? How much do you want to rely on each other versus keep it separate? And not, whatever you want to do is fine, as long as you're in agreement about what you want to do. I don't think there's a way to do it.
I mentioned before we started recording this podcast about Alora Anana, who is one of my intimacy mentors for years. She's been, in the field of love for 4 decades as well.
Yeah.
I know you've been doing this for 4 decades too. And she has a program called Beyond Talk and Fuck. And that is one of the things that she speaks about often, is that couples out there in the world, they're doing everything is so focused on talking and fucking. Like we're either talking or we're fucking.
Yeah.
She shares about there's all this space in between.
Which is where we live.
Yeah, which is where we live. And it's also, can be stuff that's like central that couples can do together.
Life is mundane. The majority of life. If you look at your calendar today, you're going to spend a lot of time doing not much of anything. Just hanging out, making lunch, talking to a friend, not sexy, exciting stuff, just life. And that's what couples spend most of their time together, is just having a life together, talking about what groceries we need. Do we want to see friends this weekend? Just pretty ordinary stuff.
And there's oftentimes too, is like I think humans believe that we have to talk to fill the space.
Yes.
And we have to have this like dynamic conversation. And
Right. Yes. And again, I think if you, planted a camera in my kitchen, it would all sound pretty mundane. I mean, sometimes not. Sometimes there are important things to talk about, and you have to be able to do that. But a lot of times it's just expressing caring through ordinary acts. I know the tea that my wife likes. And so when I put on the water in the morning, I get out a tea bag and a mug. I know which mug she likes. I know which tea she likes. It's not a big deal. It's not rocket science. I'm just expressing that I'm thinking about you. I'm not just running on my life like you don't exist. In this moment, I was thinking about you.
Thank you.
It's what couples do a lot when they're dating, and it's what they stop doing. And then they don't understand why they drift apart. And when they come to my office, I'm like, but you haven't done a single nice, considerate thing for each other in 5 years. What the hell did you think was going to happen? And so now you have to go back and sort of mechanically do the things that you used to do without thinking about, until you get to the point where it becomes more automatic again. But if you don't, if I stopped getting the tea bag out for my wife, I don't think we'd have a big blow up, but I think something would erode. And if you keep eroding and eroding and eroding, then you end up dry and not understanding why.
That reminds me of Dr. Sarah Nazaratum, who is another mentor of mine for years. She once told me that a couple, of course, there are more than two types of sex, but she was sharing, these two forms of sex. It's that there's the one that's romantic, like the candles, create the atmosphere. And the other is like you're going to the gym. Yeah. You just make sure that you have regular sex. And it might be at times you don't want to have sex, because there's times you don't want to go to the gym, but you do it so you're constantly in that activity of being together and creating intimacy with one another. So you don't, fall off and it's all of a sudden it's like, we haven't had sex in 6 months.
Right. Exactly. The Tammy Nelson, who's a couples therapist, recommends that couples who are not having much sex set a sex date, a weekly sex date, Tuesday at 3:00, doesn't matter when or where, but that's just, it's just one of the things you do. It's one of the things you count on.
Thank you for having another conversation with me.
Absolutely.
It's such a pleasure. I have a feeling that there's going to be at least a third episode that we do together, because there's more to uncover. And I do look forward to us also, we're going to figure out this way of your connection with We Deepen, and that we keep working together and sharing your wisdom with others.
I'm happy to do it. I enjoy talking with you always.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you think would be important to share before we end?
I do write pretty regularly for Psychology Today and other publications. And if you want to read what I write, if you go to my website, which is avrumweissphd.com, I will add you to the mailing list, and you will get a free ebook on relationships. And then you'll automatically get a copy of everything that I write.
Awesome. I'll link that in the show notes as well, the description of the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
Take care.
everybody, for tuning into another episode of Deepen with Christina. Again, if you enjoyed this podcast, please do like, subscribe, follow, rate. It helps more people find it. It helps me continue to host it. It also brings more people into the We Deepen network for us to be able to introduce you to as we grow. Share this episode with a friend. Go to the We Deepen calendar. Sign up for the matchmaking database. And until next time, enjoy. Bye for now.